The morning sun hit Base Echo like a hammer on an anvil. West Texas in August, where the heat doesn't creep up on you, it attacks. By 6:15 a.m., the temperature was already climbing toward 90, and the air tasted like dust and diesel fuel. 43 people stood in formation around the training yard. Cadets in their early 20s, fresh-faced and eager. Instructors with clipboards and coffee cups. Maintenance crew who'd paused mid-task because word had spread fast something was about to happen. Something worth watching. At the center of it all stood Lieutenant Cassandra Veronica Hartley. She was 5'7" in standard-issue fatigues that hung a little loose on her frame. Dark brown hair pulled back into a regulation bun so tight it looked painful. Her face was angular, sharp cheekbones that caught the light and eyes the color of storm clouds over the ocean. Gray-blue, unreadable. In her right hand she held a single sheet of paper. White, crisp, official. A medical exemption request for physical training. Her left hand hung at her side. Fingers relaxed but not limp. Not nervous. Just waiting. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the whispers that rippled through the formation like wind through tall grass. She stood there with her spine straight and her breathing steady, watching the man who stood 10 feet in front of her. Colonel Donovan Thatcher Kane. He was 45 years old but looked older in the harsh morning light. 6'1", broad shoulders that spoke of decades in the weight room. His uniform was immaculate, pressed so sharp you could cut yourself on the creases. 3 rows of ribbons on his chest, Bronze Star Purple Heart, combat deployments in places most people couldn't pronounce. His face was all hard angles. Square jaw, deep-set eyes that were almost black. A thin scar ran along his chin, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. The kind of scar that came from shrapnel, not bar fights. He took a step closer to Cassandra, close enough that his breath fogged the space between them in the morning air. Close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, the starch in his uniform. "Your husband's shadow won't save you here, Lieutenant Hartley." His voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. Not loud, didn't need to be. The words carried weight all on their own. Cassandra didn't respond, didn't blink. Just stood there with that piece of paper in her hand and her face neutral as concrete. Kane reached down, plucked the medical exemption from her fingers with a quick, almost casual movement. She let him take it. No resistance, no protest. He held it up for the crowd to see. Made sure everyone got a good look at the official letterhead, the typed paragraphs, the signature at the bottom. Then he opened his fingers. The paper floated down to the sand like a wounded bird, drifted on the hot wind for just a second before settling into the dust at Cassandra's boots. "Physical issues," Kane said, reading from memory now. His voice dripped with theatrical sympathy, the kind you use when you're pretending to care but everyone knows you don't. Health complications from traumatic stress. He turned to face the assembled troops, made eye contact with a few of the younger cadets, saw them shift uncomfortably. "You know what we called that in my day?" Kane's voice rose just enough to carry to the back row. "We called it being soft." A few nervous laughs rippled through the formation. Scattered, uncomfortable. The kind of laughter that comes when people don't know if they should react or stay silent. But the older ones, the ones who'd seen actual combat, who had their own scars and their own nightmares, they kept their faces blank. They'd learned a long time ago that laughing at someone's pain was a good way to reveal your own weakness. Near the equipment shed, Sergeant Major Wyatt Broderick Stone stood with his arms crossed over his chest. 50 years old, 5'10", compact and solid like a chunk of granite. His hair was steel gray, cut military short, and his eyes were the color of worn leather. 28 years of service ribbons decorated his chest. Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia. Places that turned boys into men and men into ghosts. He wasn't laughing. His eyes were fixed on Cassandra's stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight distributed evenly, breathing steady and controlled 4 seconds in through the nose hold, for 4 release, for 4 through barely parted lips. That breathing pattern made the hairs on the back of Wyatt's neck stand up. He'd seen that rhythm before. In raid houses in Kandahar. In tight corridors in Fallujah. In the moments before violence when operators counted their breaths like counting steps through a minefield. Something about the way she held herself perfectly still but ready to move reminded him of coiled springs, of loaded weapons. Kane wasn't finished. He circled Cassandra like a shark who'd smelled blood in the water. His boots crunched in the sand with each step. Left, then behind her, then right. Making her the center of attention, making sure everyone saw this moment. "Your husband was a good man," Kane said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Lieutenant Nathaniel Hartley, SEAL Team 6, a great warrior. He stopped directly in front of her. Close, too close. But you're not him, are you? The words hung in the air like smoke. You're just the woman he left behind. Cassandra's eyes never left his. Didn't drop, didn't waver, just held his gaze with the kind of intensity that made some people look away. Kane didn't look away, he leaned in. Close enough that his face was inches from hers. Close enough that she could count the tiny broken blood vessels in his eyes. And this, he said, voice dropping to barely above a whisper, is not a place for people who hide behind paperwork. Cassandra took one breath, 4 seconds in through her nose, held it, 4 seconds, released it through barely parted lips, 4 seconds. The rhythm was mechanical, precise, like counting steps in a minefield. Kane noticed the breathing pattern. He mistook it for fear. That's when he struck. The elbow came fast, a short, brutal jab aimed at her solar plexus but redirected at the last microsecond to her jaw. A boxer's feint, the kind of move that required training and practice and muscle memory. The crack of bone on bone echoed across the training yard. Cassandra's head snapped to the right. The force of the blow twisted her neck, sent a spray of saliva and blood into the air that caught the morning sunlight like tiny rubies. Her knees buckled. She hit the sand hard, landed on her left shoulder. Dust rose around her like smoke from an explosion billowing up in a cloud that hung in the still air. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The world contracted down to that patch of sand where a woman lay bleeding, and the man who'd put her there stood over her with his hands on his hips. Then came the whispers. Urgent. Scandalized. Shocked. Did he just, oh my God, someone needs to, but nobody stepped forward. Not yet. Kane stood over Cassandra's fallen form. His chest was heaving slightly. Not from exertion, from satisfaction. From the primal rush that comes from proving dominance in front of a crowd. Get up, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. Or stay down and prove me right. Cassandra pushed herself to a sitting position. Sand clung to her left cheek where blood seeped from a split along her jawbone. A dark line of red that traced down from the corner of her mouth to her chin. She touched it once with 2 fingers, examined the red smear, then wiped it on her pant leg without wincing. No tears, no crying out, just clinical assessment of damage. She planted her right hand flat in the sand, then her left, pushed up to her knees with the kind of controlled movement that looked rehearsed, practiced. Like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Then to her feet. The movement was fluid, efficient, not the scrambling recovery of someone stunned by violence. It looked like a drill, like something an instructor had made her practice until it became muscle memory. Wyatt Stone's eyes narrowed. He'd seen that kind of rising before, in compounds where operators took fire and kept moving because stopping meant dying. In training scenarios where falling was part of the exercise and getting back up was the whole point. Cassandra stood at attention. Her jaw was already starting to swell, a dark bloom spreading beneath the skin like ink in water. Purple and yellow at the edges. A single drop of blood traced a line down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. Around her neck hung a pendant on a thin chain. Not the usual religious medallion most soldiers wore. Not a sentimental locket or family heirloom. This was cylindrical, brushed steel, about the size of a lipstick tube. It caught the light wrong, like it was made of something denser than decorative metal. Wyatt filed that detail away in the back of his mind. Kane looked disappointed that she'd stood. Nothing to say, he asked. No, sir. Cassandra's voice was steady. No tremor, no anger, flatted as a frozen lake. Then get off my training field. She turned and walked toward the barracks, not fast, not slow. Each step measured and deliberate. Her boots left perfect prints in the sand, evenly spaced, consistent pressure. The walk of someone who knew exactly where they were going and exactly how to get there. The crowd parted to let her through. Most of them wouldn't meet her eyes. A few of the women looked furious on her behalf, hands clenched into fists at their sides, jaws tight with suppressed anger. But none of them spoke up. Kane watched her go, arms crossed, expression smug. The look of a man who'd just won something important. When she disappeared around the corner of the admin building, he clapped his hands twice. Sharp cracks that broke the tension like shattering glass. Show's over, he announced to the formation. We've got a course to run. Formation in 5 minutes. The cadets scattered, most of them grateful for an excuse to look away from what they just witnessed, to pretend they hadn't seen their commanding officer assault a subordinate in broad daylight, To go back to their routines where the world made sense and rules were followed. Wyatt remained where he was, staring at the spot where Cassandra had stood back up. Something nagged at him, a detail his subconscious had flagged, but his conscious mind hadn't fully processed yet. He walked over to the patch of sand where she'd fallen. There, pressed into the ground, was the outline of her left shoulder. But the way the sand had displaced it wasn't the chaotic spray of someone thrown off balance. The impact pattern was controlled, almost like she'd rolled with the fall to distribute the force, like someone trained to take hits and keep functioning. Wyatt looked toward the admin building. Cassandra was gone. But he made a mental note to watch her more closely. Widows didn't move like that. Victims didn't breathe like that. And that pendant, he'd seen similar devices before, in places where communications needed to be encrypted and carried close to the body, in operations where every word mattered and nothing could be traced. He shook his head and headed back toward the equipment shed. Probably nothing. Probably just a woman trying to hold it together after losing her husband. Probably. But Wyatt Stone hadn't survived 28 years in uniform by ignoring his instincts. Yeah. Inside the women's barracks bathroom, Cassandra stood at the sink with the door locked behind her. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed and flickered, made everything look washed out and clinical. Hospital lighting, interrogation room lighting. She ran cold water over a clean cloth and pressed it against her jaw. Watched her reflection in the mirror with clinical detachment. The swelling would peak in about 4 hours. The bruise would turn spectacular colors over the next week. She'd had worse. She opened her mouth carefully, tested the range of motion, moved her jaw left then right, then forward, felt for grinding or catching in the joint. No broken teeth, no fracture, just soft tissue damage. Acceptable. She pulled her phone from her pocket, not her personal device, the iPhone with the cracked screen that had her mother's number and photos of her nieces. This was a second phone, smaller, encrypted. She kept it in an inner pocket sealed with Velcro that didn't show up on metal detectors. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. Typed a short message, contact made, escalation confirmed, standing by. Sent it to a number with no name attached, just 10 digits that connected to a secure server 300 miles away. The message disappeared 3 seconds after sending, left no trace in the phone's memory, no record in any database. Just electrons scattered across encrypted channels that led nowhere. Cassandra set the phone down on the edge of the sink. She leaned against the cool porcelain, closed her eyes, let herself take 5 breaths that weren't counted, weren't controlled. 5 breaths to be the widow everyone thought she was. To remember what it felt like to be Cassandra Hartley instead of Shadow Widow Operative 06. To think about Nate, his smile, the way he used to make terrible jokes during tense moments just to break the tension. The sound of his laugh, deep and genuine and infectious. The weight of his hand on the small of her back when they danced at their wedding. The last thing he'd said to her before that final deployment, promise me you'll keep fighting. 5 breaths. Then she opened her eyes and became the operative again. She splashed cold water on her face, dried off with paper towels, straightened her uniform. Checked her reflection, one more time, jaw swelling, nicely blood cleaned up, expression neutral. Ready. She unlocked the door and headed back out into the corridor. The next 24 hours passed in slow, burning tension. Cassandra kept to herself, ate alone in the mess hall at odd hours when the crowd was thin, early breakfast at 0630 before most people were awake, late dinner at 1900 after the rush had cleared. She attended the mandatory counseling sessions she was supposedly there to lead. Sat in a small office with peeling paint and government-issue furniture. Listened to young soldiers talk about stress and fear and the weight of carrying weapons they hoped they'd never have to use. She nodded in all the right places. Asked gentle questions, took notes in a leather-bound journal. Professional, competent, harmless. Just a widow trying to serve in the only way she had left. But around the base, in the spaces between official duties, the whispers grew louder. Kane made sure of it. He stopped by tables in the mess hall, leaned in close to groups of soldiers with his hands on his hips and his voice just loud enough to carry to nearby tables. Heard she's claiming PTSD from her husband's death. Wants special treatment. At the gym, he commented loudly while spotting a lieutenant on the bench press. Made sure his voice carried across the weight room. Some people joined to serve. Others joined to collect a check and play victim. In the motor pool, while inspecting vehicles with a clipboard, he spoke to a maintenance sergeant but projected his voice so the mechanics working nearby could hear. Hartley, she'll be gone in a week. Can't handle real military life. The campaign was surgical. He never mentioned the punch, never acknowledged the violence. Instead, he painted Cassandra as fragile, opportunistic, undeserving of the uniform she wore. And it worked. By the end of day 2, most of the base had formed an opinion. The younger troops, the ones who worshipped Kane's combat record and wanted to be just like him when they got older, dismissed her entirely. Stopped making eye contact when she passed in the corridors. Made jokes about widows who couldn't hack it. The mid-level officers stayed neutral, unwilling to cross a colonel over someone they barely knew, unwilling to risk their careers for a stranger who might be gone in a week anyway. Only a handful watched and said nothing. Wyatt Stone, a couple of female instructors who'd seen this kind of campaign before, one grizzled warrant officer who'd been around long enough to recognize a setup when he saw one. Their silence was heavy with doubt. Cassandra felt the isolation like a physical thing, a bubble of empty space that moved with her through corridors and across the parade ground. Tables that went quiet when she approached. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence when she entered a room. She didn't fight it, didn't try to win hearts or correct rumors or defend herself. She simply continued her routine. Wake at 0500, physical therapy exercises in her room, stretches and body weight exercises that looked gentle but were designed to maintain combat readiness. Breakfast at 0630, counseling sessions until lunch. Paperwork in the afternoon, dinner at 1900. Lights out by 2200. The only deviation was the way she paused sometimes, standing near windows or in doorways, her eyes tracking movement across the base with the focus of someone mapping terrain, counting exits, noting patrol patterns, building a mental model of who went where and when. Wyatt noticed. On the third morning, August 8, 2023, he positioned himself near the mess hall entrance, pretended to read a maintenance report on his tablet while Cassandra collected her breakfast tray. She moved through the line efficiently. Oatmeal, black coffee, one banana. No wasted motion, no hesitation about what to choose. Just grab and go. When she reached for the coffee pot, her grip wrapped around the handle with her thumb positioned over the top and her fingers curled underneath. It was the hold of someone trained to control a weapon's recoil, applied unconsciously to a coffee pot. Wyatt followed her at a distance as she carried her tray to a corner table. Watched the way she sat with her back to the wall, facing the entrance, her eyes scanning the room in a pattern left to right, near to far exits first, then people, then potential threats. He'd done the same thing for 3 decades. It was operator behavior, threat assessment, muscle memory from years of staying alive in places where relaxing for even a moment could get you killed. You didn't learn that in counseling school. He approached her table, set his own tray down without asking permission. Mind if I sit, Lieutenant? Cassandra looked up, assessed him in one glance, posture, hands, eyes, threat level. The calculation took maybe half a second. Sergeant Major, please. Wyatt lowered himself into the chair with the careful movements of a man whose knees remembered every parachute landing from the past 3 decades. Every hard impact, every time his body had been reminded that gravity was unforgiving. They ate in silence for a minute. The mess hall buzzed around them with the usual breakfast noise. Trays clattering, conversations about the day's schedule, complaints about the quality of the eggs. Then Wyatt spoke, voice low enough that nearby tables couldn't hear. That's quite a bruise. Yes. You file a report? No. Why not? Cassandra took a sip of coffee, set the cup down precisely in the same spot it had been before, centered on a water ring handle at exactly 3 o'clock. Because it wouldn't change anything, she said, and because I have my reasons. Wyatt studied her face. The bruise had ripened over the past 2 days. Deep purple in the center where the impact had been worst, fading to yellow and green at the edges. It covered half her jaw and extended up to her cheekbone, made her look like she'd gone 10 rounds with someone twice her size. She wore it without makeup, without shame, like it was just another part of her uniform. Your husband, Wyatt said carefully. He was SEAL Team 6, wasn't he? Something flickered in Cassandra's eyes. Not pain, not grief, calculation. Yes. Lost him 2 years ago, Afghanistan. Yes. That must have been hard. It was. Wyatt nodded slowly. He was fishing, trying to gauge whether grief or something else lived behind that controlled facade. I knew some Team 6 guys back in the day, he said. Good men, toughest training in the world. Toughest operators I ever met. He paused, took a bite of his eggs, gave her time to respond if she wanted to. She didn't. You ever spend time around the teams, he asked? Learn any of their habits? Cassandra met his gaze directly, her storm gray eyes locked onto his with the kind of intensity that made most people uncomfortable. The kind of stare that said, I see you, I know what you're doing, and I'm 3 steps ahead. I learned that strong people don't need to prove it, she said quietly, and that silence is often the smartest strategy. It wasn't an answer to his question, but it was a message. Back off, old man. You're getting too close to something you're not ready to understand. Wyatt heard it loud and clear. He finished his eggs, drained his coffee, stood with a grunt that his knees felt in their bones. Well, Lieutenant, he said, if you ever need someone to talk to someone who doesn't repeat things, you know where to find me. Thank you, Sergeant Major. As he walked away, Wyatt felt the weight of her gaze on his back, tracking him, measuring him, filing him away in whatever mental database she kept. He'd been right. This woman was not what she appeared to be. The question was, what was she actually doing here? And more importantly, who was she really working for? That afternoon, Kane made his next move. He called Cassandra into his office. A converted storage room in the admin building with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that overlooked the obstacle course. She arrived exactly on time, knocked twice, waited for permission to enter. Kane didn't look up from his paperwork for a full 30 seconds. A power play so obvious, it would have been funny if the stakes weren't what they were, making her stand there, making her wait, establishing dominance through the most childish means possible. Finally, he looked up. Sit. Cassandra sat, hands folded in her lap, posture straight but not rigid, the position of someone who knew how to wait and didn't mind doing it. Kane leaned back in his chair, made it creak, a deliberate sound meant to fill the silence. I've been reviewing your file, Hartley. He tapped a manila folder on his desk. Impressive credentials, master's in psychology from Georgetown, certification in trauma counseling, 2 years with the VA before this. He closed the folder with a soft thump. But here's the thing. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on the desk. This isn't the VA, this is an active military base, and I need people who can keep up physically and mentally. I understand, sir. Do you? Don't, his voice hardened. Because from where I'm sitting, you've been here 3 days and you're already causing problems. Rumors, distractions. My soldiers are supposed to be focused on training, not gossiping about some counselor who can't handle the environment. Cassandra said nothing, just sat there with her hands folded and her face neutral and her breathing steady. Kane waited, hoping she'd defend herself, give him something to latch onto, some emotional reaction he could use against her. When she didn't, he shifted tactics. I'm going to make this simple. He leaned back again, steepled his fingers like he was delivering wisdom from on high. Tomorrow morning, 0600, you're going to run the obstacle course with the cadets. Full gear. If you complete it within standard time, you stay. If you don't, you request immediate transfer to a desk job somewhere safe and quiet. He smiled, thin and cold. I think that's fair, don't you? It wasn't fair. It was a trap. The obstacle course at Base Echo was brutal. Rope climbs that left your hands bleeding. Wall vaults that required explosive power. Mud pits under barbed wire where one wrong move meant stitches. Cargo nets that tested your grip strength and your fear of heights. Most new arrivals took weeks to build up the endurance and technique needed to finish within regulation time. Kane was banking on Cassandra failing publicly, giving him grounds to remove her without triggering an official complaint or an inspector general investigation. And if she refused to attempt it, that would be just as good. Proof that she couldn't hack it. Either way, she'd be gone. Cassandra looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, sir, 0600. I'll be there. Kane's smile widened, genuine satisfaction blooming warm in his chest. Outstanding, dismissed. She stood, saluted, left without another word. Kane watched her go, watched the door close behind her. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a group text to 5 of his most loyal officers. Hartley running obstacle course tomorrow, 0600. Spread the word. Should be entertaining. By dinner, the entire base knew. The mess hall buzzed with speculation. Bets were placed. Odds were calculated. Some felt bad for Cassandra, convinced she was being set up to fail and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Others thought it was about time someone made her prove she belonged. A few, mostly the ones who'd seen combat and recognized the signs of something deeper happening, wondered why she'd agreed so easily. Running a course you weren't prepared for was suicide for your reputation. A public failure you'd never live down, unless you had a reason to believe you'd succeed. Wyatt heard about it from a junior instructor who could barely contain his excitement. $50 says she doesn't make it past the rope climb, the kid said, grinning like he'd just discovered free beer. Wyatt didn't take the bet. Instead, he made sure his schedule was clear for tomorrow morning. cleared his 0600 slot, made a note on his calendar. He had a feeling this was going to be more interesting than anyone expected. That night, Cassandra sat on her bunk with the door locked and the blinds closed. The overhead light was off, just the glow from her laptop screen illuminating her face in the darkness. She'd removed the steel pendant from around her neck, twisted it open with a quarter turn that revealed a USB port hidden inside the cylinder, plugged it into her secure phone, typed a message, escalation to physical test, proceeding as planned. Recommend surveillance on equipment shed 0500 to 0600 tomorrow. Hit send, waited. The reply came back in under a minute. Roger, eyes on, stay sharp. She disconnected the device, sealed it with another quarter turn, hung it back around her neck where it settled against her sternum, cold metal against warm skin. Then she lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, stared at the ceiling in the darkness, and closed her eyes. Sleep came easily. It always did before a mission. At 04:55 the next morning, August 9, 2023, the equipment shed was dark and silent. At 04:57, the side door opened, just a crack at first, then wider, slow, controlled. The kind of opening that makes no sound if you know how to do it right. A figure slipped inside, moving with confidence in the blackness. No flashlight, no fumbling, just hands that knew exactly where everything was stored because they'd been here before. Multiple times, memorizing the layout. The figure located the gear bag labeled Hartley C and unzipped it. Inside was standard issue climbing equipment. Harness, carabiners, rope, gloves. The figure selected the 2 carabiners attached to the harness, examined them by feel in the darkness, found the locking mechanism a threaded collar that screwed down to prevent accidental opening. Loosened it 3/4 of a turn, not enough to be obvious on visual inspection. Not enough that you'd notice just by looking at it in good light, but enough that under body weight and stress, the lock would fail. The figure zipped the bag closed, moved toward the exit with the same controlled silence. The whole operation took 90 seconds. Start to finish. No witnesses, no cameras in that corner of the base. Perfect. Except for the micro camera mounted inside a ventilation grate. Installed 2 nights ago by someone who knew exactly what to look for and exactly where Kane's people would strike. The camera watched, recorded, transmitted the footage in real time to a server located 300 meters away. In a hotel room 4 miles off base, Commander Garrison Locke Reynolds sat on a chair that had seen better days, drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup that tasted like disappointment, watching his tablet screen with the focused intensity of a man whose job was to catch monsters. He was 40 years old, 6 feet tall, brown hair going gray at the temples, a neatly trimmed beard that made him look more like a professor than a counterintelligence officer. But his eyes were sharp, alert, missing nothing. On the screen, he watched the shadowy figure work on the carabiner, zoomed in, captured a clear frame showing the deliberate sabotage. The 3/4 turn that would kill someone if they didn't know to check. Garrison picked up his phone, sent a message, evidence secured, proceed. At Base Echo in her quarters, Cassandra's phone buzzed silently under her pillow. She'd been awake for 10 minutes already, lying still in the darkness, breathing steady, preparing. She checked the message, read it, deleted it, stood and dressed in her PT uniform, black shorts, gray t-shirt with Army printed across the chest, running shoes that had seen 1,000 miles. She laced her boots with the methodical care of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Each lace pulled to exactly the right tension, each knot tied with muscle memory that didn't require thought. Checked her watch, 05:30, time to move. The obstacle course at 0600 was not the quiet morning training session Kane had advertised. Word had spread like wildfire through the base. By the time Cassandra arrived, over 70 people had gathered around the perimeter. Cadets, instructors, support staff, even a few officers from other units who'd heard the rumors and wanted to see the spectacle for themselves. Kane stood near the starting line, arms crossed, looking pleased with the turnout. He'd positioned this as entertainment, and the crowd had delivered. Cassandra approached alone, no supporters, no allies, no one walking beside her offering encouragement or words of comfort. Just her, walking across the sand toward the starting line where Kane waited. She wore standard PT gear. Her dark hair was braided tight against her skull, not a regulation bun, but a combat braid that wouldn't come loose no matter what happened. The bruise on her jaw had faded to a sickly yellow-green that looked worse in the harsh morning light. She stopped in front of Kane, stood at attention. "Ready, Lieutenant," his voice carried, projecting to the crowd, making sure everyone heard this moment. Yes, sir. Good. He gestured toward the course with one hand. Regulation time is 12 minutes. You've got 15 because I'm feeling generous. A few people in the crowd snorted. Generous, right. After the rope climb, King continued, you'll hit the wall vault, then the mud crawl, then the cargo net. Finish line is at the far end. Any questions? No, sir. Then let's see what you've got. He raised his hand, paused for dramatic effect, made sure everyone was watching, then dropped it. Go. Cassandra moved, not sprinting, not rushing. She approached the first obstacle, a series of low hurdles at a controlled jog. Cleared them with economical movements, no wasted energy, just efficient motion that carried her forward without burning through her reserves. The crowd watched, waiting for her to falter. She didn't. She reached the rope climb, the first major test, a 30-foot vertical rope hanging from a steel frame, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. This was where most people failed, where upper body strength and technique separated those who could from those who couldn't. Wyatt Stone stood near the back of the crowd, eyes locked on Cassandra's gear bag sitting open near the start line. He'd watched her collect it from the shed, watched her do a quick visual check of the equipment, but you couldn't see a loosened carabiner lock just by looking, not unless you knew exactly what to check and you took your time doing it. You'd only know when it failed. Cassandra pulled on her climbing harness, attached the carabiners with practiced efficiency. Clipped in, tested the connections with a quick tug. The crowd murmured. Someone near the front said, she actually knows how to use that stuff. Kane frowned slightly. Cassandra gripped the rope, placed her boots against it in a proper climbing stance, feet crossed using leg strength instead of just arms, and began to climb, hand over hand, smooth and rhythmic. The rope swayed with her weight, but she moved with it instead of fighting it. 10 feet, 20 feet. She was halfway to the top when the first carabiner lock slipped. The metallic click was almost inaudible under the morning wind and the murmur of the crowd. But Cassandra felt it, a sudden looseness in the safety line that shouldn't be there, a shift in tension that meant something was wrong. Her training kicked in faster than thought. Without hesitation, without even a moment of panic, she released the primary rope with her left hand and grabbed the secondary safety line that ran parallel. A backup most climbers ignored because regulation didn't require using both. Her right hand maintained grip on the main rope as her body weight shifted. The crowd gasped. It looked like she was about to fall. Wyatt's heart slammed against his ribs. Grab the secondary, he shouted. But she'd already done it. Cassandra's fingers wrapped around the backup line with the precision of someone who'd trained for exactly this scenario, who'd drilled it hundreds of times until the response became automatic. She hung suspended for 2 seconds, legs swinging, body weight fully supported by one hand on a rope that wasn't even part of the official course. Then she pulled herself up, using the secondary line alone, raw upper body strength. No panic, no hesitation, no scrambling or kicking or desperate flailing. Just controlled, powerful movement that carried her upward foot by foot. She reached the top of the frame, touched the bell that marked completion. The clear ding rang out across the training yard, and descended using the backup line exclusively, ignoring the sabotaged equipment entirely. When her boots hit the ground, the crowd was silent, stunned. That wasn't luck. That was skill, muscle memory, the kind of recovery you only performed if you drilled it hundreds of times until it became reflex. Kane's face had gone pale. What the how did you? Cassandra unclipped the harness and let it fall to the ground. The loosened carabiner was now visible, hanging wrong, lock clearly compromised. She didn't point it out, didn't need to. Wyatt was already walking toward it, his expression dark as a thunderstorm gathering on the horizon. He picked up the harness, examined the equipment with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 3 decades making sure his gear wouldn't kill him. Then he looked at Kane with something cold and dangerous in his eyes. This carabiner's been tampered with, Wyatt said, loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Lock's been loosened. She should have fallen. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying, the safe bubble of plausible deniability bursting like a soap bubble in a storm. Kane stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture meant to calm. Now hold on, that's a serious claim. It's a serious fact, Wyatt snapped. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. Someone sabotaged this gear, and since Lieutenant Hartley is the only person scheduled to use it, I'd say someone wanted her to get hurt. Badly. He turned to face the crowd, swept his gaze across the assembled faces. Who had access to the equipment shed between midnight and 0500? Nobody answered. Silence thick as fog. Kane's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Gear malfunctions happen all the time. It doesn't mean I check every piece of equipment in that shed personally," Wyatt interrupted. "I checked these carabiners 2 days ago. They were fine." He looked at Cassandra. "You do a pre-climb inspection, Lieutenant." Cassandra nodded. "Visual only. The compromise wasn't obvious." "But you knew to grab the secondary line." "Yes." "That's not standard training. That's advanced rescue technique." Cassandra said nothing, just stood there. Blood from her earlier injury starting to seep again from the exertion, a thin line of red tracing down from the corner of her mouth. Breathing controlled, face unreadable. The crowd watched her like she'd just performed a magic trick they couldn't figure out, like she'd revealed something impossible, and now they had to recalibrate everything they thought they knew. Kane looked between her and Wyatt, realizing he was losing control of the narrative, losing the room. "Everyone back to morning duties," Kane barked. His voice had lost some of its command, some of its certainty. "Show's over. Hartley, my office. Now." Cassandra's voice was quiet but carried. "Respectfully, sir, I'd like to complete the course." Kane stared at her. "You're not serious. You gave me 15 minutes. I've used 6. She picked up a pair of work gloves from the gear bag. "I'd like to finish." The crowd held its breath. This was insane. She'd just survived sabotage. Someone had literally tried to kill her, and she wanted to keep going. Kane's options were limited. If he stopped her now, it would look like he was afraid of what she might prove. If he let her continue and she completed the course, he'd have to acknowledge she belonged here. Either way, he was cornered. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "Finish." Cassandra walked to the wall vault. 12 feet of vertical timber, no handholds. Just raw wood that offered nothing but splinters. She backed up 10 paces, then ran, hit the wall at speed, planted her left foot halfway up, pushed off with explosive power, grabbed the top edge with both hands, and hauled herself over in one smooth motion, dropped to the other side, rolled to absorb the impact, came up running. The crowd started to wake up, a few scattered claps breaking out, growing louder. She hit the mud crawl. 50 feet of barbed wire stretched over ankle-deep mud that smelled like rust and regret. Dropped to her belly, moved like a snake, elbows and knees driving her forward. Head down, no hesitation. Emerged at the far end covered in brown sludge, face streaked with dirt, but moving steady. She reached the cargo net, began to climb. The net swayed and twisted under her weight, 50 feet tall, every handhold unstable, every foothold threatening to slip. She climbed it like she'd been doing it her whole life. Over the top, down the other side, sprint to the finish line. She crossed it with 4 minutes to spare. The crowd exploded, cheering, whistling, cadets pumping fists in the air. Even some of the ones who doubted her couldn't help but react to the sheer determination on display. The raw refusal to quit. Wyatt was grinning, a rare sight on his weathered face. Kane looked like he'd swallowed a live grenade. Cassandra walked back to the start line, breathing hard but steady, stopped in front of Kane. 11 minutes, sir, within regulation." Kane couldn't speak. His face was red, veins standing out on his neck like cables under tension. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Finally, he managed 2 words. "Get cleaned up. Report to my office in 1 hour." "Yes, sir." As Cassandra walked toward the barracks, Wyatt fell into step beside her. Kept his voice low enough that only she could hear. "That was one hell of a performance, Lieutenant." "Thank you, Sergeant Major. You mind telling me where you learned to climb like that?" Cassandra glanced at him, saw the question behind the question, the suspicion, the curiosity. She decided to give him a slice of truth. "My husband taught me," she said. "He said it might save my life someday." Smart man. He was. They reached the barracks door. Wyatt stopped. Cassandra turned to face him. "Listen," he said, "I don't know what's going on here, but that gear didn't loosen itself. And you handled that rope failure like you trained for it specifically." He paused, chose his words carefully. "If someone's trying to hurt you, you need to report it officially." Cassandra met his eyes, those storm gray eyes that gave nothing away. "I appreciate the concern, Sergeant Major, but I'm exactly where I need to be." She went inside. Wyatt stood on the steps, staring at the closed door, feeling like he'd just glimpsed the edge of something massive lurking beneath still water, something dangerous, something deliberate. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to an old friend who owed him favors. Need you to run a background check. Lieutenant Cassandra Veronica Hartley. Everything you can find. Call me. The response came back in 30 seconds. Already on it. You'll want to sit down for this one. The water in the shower ran brown for the first 30 seconds. Mud and sand spiraling down the drain like the base's reputation circling into darkness. Cassandra stood under the scalding spray with her eyes closed, letting the heat work into muscles that had been tested and found adequate. The split on her jaw had scabbed over, pulling tight when she opened her mouth. She tested the range of motion left, right, forward. Everything worked. That's what mattered. She dried off. Dressed in a clean uniform. Checked her secure phone. One message waited. Package delivered. Asset in position. Green light for phase 2. She deleted it, tucked the phone away, headed to Kane's office. The corridors were quieter than usual, people averting their eyes as she passed. News of the sabotaged equipment had spread like smoke through ventilation shafts. Nobody knew what to make of her anymore. The widow who wouldn't break. The counselor who climbed like a specialist. The woman who walked through Kane's traps like they were inconveniences instead of attempts on her life. Kane's door was open. He sat behind his desk with his fingers steepled and his face carved from stone. The afternoon sun came through the window behind him, backlit him like some dark prophet delivering judgment. Cassandra knocked once, entered when he gestured, stood at attention. Neither spoke for 10 seconds. He was trying to intimidate her with silence. The oldest power play in the book. Let the subordinates squirm. Let them fill the quiet with apologies and explanations. It didn't work. Cassandra could outweight a glacier. That was quite a show this morning, Kane finally said. His voice was controlled, but barely, like a dam holding back floodwater. You want to explain how you knew to grab that secondary line? Training, sir. What kind of training? The thorough kind. Kane's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. You're playing games, Hartley. I don't appreciate games. I'm not playing anything, sir. You set a standard. I met it. He stood abruptly, chair scraping back with a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. Walked around the desk until he was 3 feet from her. Close enough to loom, far enough to maintain plausible deniability if anyone asked later. Let me be crystal clear. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, the kind of quiet that's more threatening than shouting. I don't care what skills you think you have. I don't care who your husband was. You don't belong here. He leaned closer. This base runs on discipline and strength, not sympathy for people who can't handle the reality of military life. Cassandra's expression didn't change. Is there anything else, sir? Kane wanted to hit her again. She could see it in the microtension around his eyes, the way his right hand curled into a fist and then released, the quickening of his breath. But they weren't alone on a training field now. They were in his office where assault would be harder to excuse, harder to spin as an accident or a training exercise gone wrong. He settled for leaning closer, voice dropping to a whisper meant to cut deep. I know why you're really here, he said. You think if you tough it out, prove yourself, it'll bring him back somehow. Fill the hole he left. His breath was hot on her face, but it won't. He's gone. And you're just embarrassing his memory by pretending to be something you're not. It was designed to wound, to find the emotional pressure point and press until something broke. Cassandra looked at him with eyes like frozen lakes and said, Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted, you didn't know my husband. You don't know me, and you have no idea what I'm capable of. She paused just long enough for the words to settle like stones dropping into deep water. Is that all, sir? Kane's face flushed dark red, the color of rage barely contained, of a man realizing he was losing a battle he thought he'd already won. Get out, Cassandra saluted, turned, left. Behind her, she heard something hit the wall, a coffee mug probably, shattering into ceramic shrapnel that would leave a stain on the cheap paint. She kept walking, face neutral as a mask, while inside a cold satisfaction bloomed like frost on a winter morning. He was rattled, making mistakes, losing control. That's exactly what she needed. The next escalation came that evening. Cassandra was in her quarters reviewing counseling notes when her personal phone buzzed. Not the secure one, her regular device. The one that connected to the normal world. A text from an unknown number. Check your email, you'll want to see this. She opened her laptop, navigated to her inbox with the kind of deliberate calm that came from expecting attacks from every angle. The subject line read, SEAL Widow Can't Handle Reality. The email contained a link. She clicked it, already knowing what she'd find, but needing to see it anyway. Document it, add it to the case file that was growing thicker by the hour. The link opened to an internal base message board, the kind soldiers used to share news and jokes and gossip when they thought nobody important was watching. Someone had posted a photo of her from this morning's obstacle course, mid-fall on the rope climb, face contorted, body twisted at an awkward angle. The photo had been taken at exactly the right moment to make it look like she was flailing, panicking, losing control. The caption read, "Lieutenant Hartley proving she doesn't belong. Took her husband's name but not his courage. How long before she quits?" Below the post, comments piled up like snow in a blizzard. 63 replies in 4 hours. Some defended her, most didn't. She's taking up space someone useful could fill. Embarrassing. My grandmother climbs better than that. Why is she even here? Collect that widow's pension and go home. Diversity hire bullshit. The thread had gone viral within the base ecosystem, spreading through barracks and offices and motor pools, poisoning the well of public opinion one comment at a time. Cassandra took a screenshot, saved it to a folder labeled Evidence that already contained 47 other files. Closed the laptop. This was Kane's work, or someone acting on his behalf. Coordinated character assassination to complement the physical intimidation. Standard playbook for people who thought they were untouchable. She'd expected it, planned for it. But seeing the cruelty laid out in text form, the casual dehumanization, the way people felt comfortable saying things they'd never say to her face, still triggered something cold and sharp in her chest. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too useful to her enemies. This was the ice that came before a storm. She picked up her secure phone, typed "Digital attack initiated, preserve all evidence, recommend monitoring board activity for additional actors." Sent it. The response came quickly. "Already archived. We have IPs, 2 officers, 3 enlisted. Kane's fingerprints all over this." Cassandra set the phone down. Lay back on her bunk. She let herself think about Nate. Not the helmet cam footage, not the mission. Just the man who used to make terrible coffee and sing off key in the shower. The man who'd promised her forever and delivered 2 years. The grief was a physical weight, but so was the fury. She stood, splashed water on her face, became the operative again. The next morning, she found her locker in the women's changing room had been vandalized. Someone had scratched the word fraud across the front, deep gouges in the metal that would need to be buffed out. The kind of damage that took time and effort and focused rage. Inside, her spare PT uniform had been shredded, cut into ribbons with something sharp. Scissors, maybe, or a knife. The fabric hung in strips like the remains of something killed and left to rot. Her running shoes were missing. In their place sat a pair of children's sneakers, pink, with cartoon characters on the sides. Little princesses smiling up at her with their sparkly tiaras and impossible proportions. The message was clear. You're a joke, a child pretending to be a soldier. Cassandra examined the damage without expression, pulled out her phone, photographed everything from multiple angles, sent the images to the secure server where Commander Reynolds was building a case that would end careers. Then she changed into her remaining uniform, laced up her boots, headed to breakfast. She'd run in boots before. Wouldn't be the first time. Wouldn't be the last. At the mess hall, the whispers followed her like contrails behind a jet. People stared openly now. No pretense of subtlety, no attempts to hide their judgment. She collected her tray. Oatmeal, coffee, orange, scanned for a seat. Every table was full except one in the far corner. The isolation table, the place where people sat when nobody wanted to sit with them. She headed toward it. As she passed a group of junior officers, one of them stuck his foot out, a deliberate trip, testing whether she'd react, whether she'd finally lose her composure and give them something to use against her. She saw it coming, adjusted her path by 6 inches, kept walking. The officer's buddies laughed at his failed attempt, loud enough for her to hear, wanting her to know they'd tried, wanting her to feel the hostility like radiation. She sat alone, ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Across the room, Kane held court at a table surrounded by his loyal cadre. Officers who'd hitched their careers to his star, who laughed at his jokes and nodded at his wisdom and did whatever he asked because climbing the ladder mattered more than integrity. He glanced her way once, smirked, then returned to whatever story he was telling. His audience laughed on cue, too loud, performing for his approval like trained seals hoping for fish. Cassandra noted each face, memorized details, added them to the mental database she maintained with photographic precision. Every person who participated in this campaign was digging their own hole. She was just holding the shovel, waiting for them to dig deep enough to make climbing out impossible. Wyatt entered the mess hall, spotted Cassandra, headed straight for her table without hesitation, sat down without asking permission. "Morning, Lieutenant." "Sergeant Major." He set his tray down, leaned in close, voice low and urgent. "I heard about your locker, and I saw that garbage on the message board." His eyes were hard, angry on her behalf in a way that made her chest tighten. "This has gone too far. You need to file an official complaint, IG investigation, the whole deal." "I appreciate your concern. That's not an answer." Cassandra sipped her coffee, set it down precisely. "I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" Wyatt's frustration was evident, the kind that came from watching injustice unfold and feeling powerless to stop it. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're getting crucified and you're just taking it. You've got rights, protections. Use them." "Some battles aren't fought in boardrooms, Sergeant Major." "Then where are they fought?" Cassandra didn't answer, just held his gaze until he looked away, shaking his head. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met," he said quietly, "or you're walking a line I don't understand." "Maybe both. Maybe both." Wyatt studied her face, the fading bruise, the determination that sat behind those storm-gray eyes like bedrock. "Your husband taught you to climb. What else did he teach you?" Cassandra's expression shifted, just for a moment, a crack in the armor that let through a sliver of something real. "That the hardest part of any mission is waiting for your enemy to make the mistake you know is coming." Before Wyatt could respond, she stood. "Thank you for your concern, Sergeant Major. It means more than you know." She left him sitting there, staring after her with the growing certainty that he was watching something much bigger than a harassment case unfold. He pulled out his phone, called his contact at CIA. "I need that background check, now." The voice on the other end was careful, measured. "Stone, you're not going to believe this. Cassandra Hartley isn't just a counselor. She's got security clearance 3 levels above Kane's." A pause. "And there's a notation in her file. Any interference with her activities should be reported immediately to Commander Garrison Locke Reynolds." Wyatt's blood ran cold. "Reynolds, Counterintelligence Division." "Correct. And he arrived at the base last night, checked in under fake orders. Stone, whatever's happening here, it's bigger than what you think. Way bigger." Wyatt hung up, sat frozen at the table. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture he should have seen days ago. Cassandra Hartley wasn't a victim. She was bait, and Kane had just swallowed the hook. That afternoon, the tension ratcheted higher. Cassandra was leaving a counseling session when she noticed the atmosphere had changed. Soldiers moving with purpose. Conversations stopping when she approached. Something was happening. She found out what at 1400 hours. 2 military police officers appeared at her office door. Corporal Jenkins and Private Reese, both young, both uncomfortable with what they'd been ordered to do. "Lieutenant Hartley?" Jenkins held a clipboard like it might protect him. "Ma'am, we've received a complaint that you accessed restricted areas without authorization. Specifically, the equipment shed between 0300 and 0400 yesterday morning." Cassandra stood, face neutral. "I see. Security logs show unauthorized access at 0347. Your ID badge was scanned at the side entrance. Understanding bloomed cold and sharp. Kane had cloned her badge. Or fabricated the log entry, standard tradecraft for someone trying to frame a target. "I'd like to examine those logs myself," she said calmly. "That'll be part of the questioning process, ma'am." Jenkins shifted his weight. "If you'll come with us." The walk across the base was a public spectacle. Kane had made sure of it. Soldiers stopping to watch. Phones coming out. The widow being escorted by MPS like a criminal. By the time they reached the MP station, half the base knew. In the windowless interview room, Cassandra sat with her hands folded on the metal table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. The MPs stood outside, conferring in low voices she could hear through the thin walls. She knew they had nothing real, no actual evidence, because she hadn't been anywhere near that shed at 0300. But someone had, and that someone had been recorded by equipment the MPs didn't know existed. She just had to wait. The door opened. Commander Garrison Locke Reynolds entered, dressed in standard officer uniform. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed counterintelligence, just another mid-level officer doing paperwork. He dismissed the MPs with a gesture, closed the door, sat across from Cassandra. For 10 seconds, they just looked at each other. Then Garrison's mouth quirked. "You look like hell." The other guy looked smug. Won't last. He opened a folder. Spread photographs across the table. We've got him on equipment tampering, harassment, destruction of property, and 6 violations of conduct unbecoming. The IP trace on that message board leads straight to his office computer. He tapped one photo. And this morning's stunt fabricating security logs to frame you, that's falsifying official records. Federal offense. Cassandra looked at the evidence with clinical detachment. The original mission report from Afghanistan. Garrison's expression darkened. We accessed the sealed files. Nate's helmet cam had backup power like you said. 47 seconds of footage after the primary failed. He pulled out another photo, a still frame from the video. Kane ordered withdrawal 15 minutes before the ambush. Left 5 men to hold a position he knew was compromised. Then falsified the after-action report. Claimed tactical necessity. Got a Bronze Star for it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Cassandra's hands remained perfectly still, but something behind her eyes turned to flint. How soon can we move? One problem. Garrison leaned back. We need him to act one more time. Something public, undeniable. Right now, a good lawyer could argue negligence on the equipment, could say junior officers acted independently on the harassment. He met her eyes. We need him to personally cross a line he can't walk back from. He will. Cassandra's voice was absolutely certain. He's escalating, losing control. Men like him can't help themselves when they feel cornered. How do you know? She touched the pendant at her throat. Because I've been studying him for 3 months, and I know exactly which buttons to push. Garrison studied her, saw the toll this operation had taken. The bruises, the isolation, the daily assault on everything that made her human. Are you sure you want to finish this? We could pull you now, build the case with what we have. No, William, the word was absolute. He needs to face every name he left behind, including mine. Garrison nodded slowly. Then we wait. But Cassandra, the moment he makes physical contact again, we move. I won't risk serious injury. Understood. And if things go sideways, you abort. That's an order. Yes, sir. Garrison gathered the photos. For what it's worth, Nate would be proud. Cassandra's voice softened, just barely. He'd tell me I'm being reckless. Then he'd help me plan it better. Sounds like a good man. The best. Garrison left. The MPS returned, told Cassandra the accusation had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, released her with apologies that rang hollow. She walked back across the base in afternoon sun. Every eye on her, every whispered comment about how she'd gotten off on a technicality, how she must have connections, how guilty people always found a way out. The truth that she'd been innocent was the least popular version. That evening, Kane made his move. An unscheduled assembly, mandatory attendance, all personnel to the main training yard at 1800 hours. Over 200 soldiers gathered in formation, confused, wary, wondering what announcement required this kind of show. Kane stood on a raised platform, microphone in hand, the setting sun behind him painting the sky blood red. Cassandra stood in the back row, expressionless, waiting. I want to address something, Kane began. His voice boomed across the yard. There's been a lot of talk lately. Rumors, distractions, and it ends today. He paused. Let the silence build. Lieutenant Hartley came to this base to serve as a counselor, but her actions, the complaints, the disruptions, the questionable behavior don't reflect our standards. 200 pairs of eyes shifted toward Cassandra. Therefore, effective immediately, Lieutenant Hartley will be reassigned to administrative duties pending a full conduct review. Kane's smile was thin, victorious. She will no longer participate in training, will not interact with cadets, will confine her activities to her office. This decision is final. It was a power play dressed as policy, no due process, no appeal, just Kane using his rank to destroy what was left of her credibility. The crowd murmured, some approving, some uneasy. Wyatt's face was thunderous. He started to step forward. Cassandra caught his eye, shook her head once. Don't. Kane continued. I know some of you think I'm being harsh, but leadership means making tough calls. Colonel Kane, the voice cut through his speech like a scalpel. Commander Garrison Locke Reynolds stepped out from behind the admin building, flanked by 4 counterintelligence agents in plain clothes with badges visible on their belts. He walked across the yard with measured steps, each one echoing in the sudden silence. Kane's face went pale. Commander Reynolds, this is unexpected. I'm sure it is. Garrison stopped at the base of the platform, looked up at Kane with eyes like flint. Colonel, I need you to step down. We have some things to discuss. This is highly irregular. I'm in the middle of... Step down, sir, now. Something in Garrison's tone made refusal impossible. Kane descended, confusion giving way to the first real flickers of fear. What's this about? Garrison turned to address the assembled troops, his voice carried without shouting. Calm, professional, devastating. I apologize for the interruption. What you're about to witness is the result of a 3-month counterintelligence operation. He paused. Let that sink in. Everyone remain in formation. Do not leave. Do not interfere. He looked at Kane. Colonel Donovan Thatcher Kane, you are hereby placed under arrest for dereliction of duty, falsifying official reports, destruction of government property, assault on a federal operative, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The yard exploded. Shouts. Gasps. Soldiers breaking formation despite orders. Kane staggered back. That's insane. I don't know what lies Hartley has been feeding you. Lieutenant Hartley is not just a counselor, Colonel. Garrison nodded to an agent who pulled out a tablet. She's the founder of Shadow Widow, a counterintelligence unit that investigates betrayal within special operations. She's been operating under deep cover for 90 days. Kane's mouth opened, closed. No sound. He looked at Cassandra across 20 feet of dirt. Their eyes met. She reached up, pulled down the collar of her uniform, revealing the top of her left shoulder. There, in black ink, 2 serpents coiled around each other. Ancient symbols of vengeance and justice intertwined, the mark of Shadow Widow. The crowd gasped. The tattoo was unmistakable. Not decorative, not military standard, a unit designation. The kind operators wore to identify each other in the shadows. Wyatt stepped forward, recognition dawning. He'd seen similar marks before, on operators who hunted in the dark places. Kane's phone buzzed. He pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen displayed an alert, security breach detected. Shadow Widow operative identified at Base Echo. Immediate stand-down required. The message had been sent automatically, triggered by facial recognition when Cassandra's tattoo came into view. Digital proof, time-stamped, irrefutable. Kane looked from the phone to Cassandra and saw her for what she really was. Not a victim, not a widow playing dress-up. A hunter who'd circled him for months, waiting for him to provide enough rope. You, he whispered, this whole time. Yes, Cassandra's voice was calm, but underneath ran a current of frozen steel. 3 months ago, I requested this assignment, came here under false pretenses. Let you think I was weak, broken, easy to break further. She took 3 steps forward. Every insult, every threat, every time you tried to destroy me, you were building my case. I didn't need to hunt you, Colonel. I just needed you to be yourself. Garrison held up the tablet. We have footage of you tampering with climbing equipment, IP logs linking you to harassment, testimony from 12 witnesses. He swiped to a new screen. And we have this. He turned the tablet toward the crowd. On screen, helmet camera footage, grainy, jerking, a firefight in desert terrain. Radio chatter, then a voice, clear and commanding. Viper 1, withdraw now, that's an order. The camera panned right, 5 soldiers pinned down. One of them, Lieutenant Nathaniel Hartley, looked directly at the lens, shook his head. Sir, we can hold. We need air support. The radio cut out. The camera showed a figure retreating, leaving the 5 behind. 30 seconds later, the screen went white. Explosion. The yard was silent as a grave. Every person understood what they'd witnessed. Kane's face had gone gray. Sweat on his forehead, his knees buckled. He dropped to the sand. You weren't supposed to know, he said, voice barely audible. The files were sealed, classified. But I did know. Cassandra crouched to his level, voice soft and lethal. Nate's helmet cam had backup battery, kept recording 47 seconds after primary power failed. Those 47 seconds showed everything. Where you went, what you said, who you left to die. She pulled out the steel pendant, opened it, showed him the USB drive inside. I've been carrying his last moments around my neck for 2 years, waiting for the right time, the right leverage. She stood, looked down at him. You wanted me gone because I reminded you of what you did, but I stayed, not to forgive, not to heal. I stayed to make sure you face every name you left behind. The CI agents moved in, pulled Kane to his feet, secured his hands with zip ties. Garrison read his rights, words mechanical and official. But Cassandra barely heard. Her focus was on the crowd, the faces showing shock, betrayal, vindication. One of the female cadets stepped forward, came to attention, saluted, then another, then 5 more. Within 30 seconds, half the women in formation were saluting. Not because regulations required it, because they'd witnessed something that mattered. A woman who'd endured hell stayed silent and emerged with evidence that would burn her tormentor down. Cassandra returned the salute, throat tight. She hadn't expected this, hadn't planned for the moment when silence transformed into solidarity. She held it for 3 counts, then dropped her hand. As CI agents loaded Kane into an armored transport, he looked back. I could have ended you. One word. Cassandra paused, turned. You did end me, just not the way you thought. You ended the woman who believed the system protects the innocent. She gestured to herself. What's standing here now, this is what you created, and I'll spend my career hunting down every person like you. The transport doors closed. Kane disappeared behind tinted windows. The vehicle drove away, dust hanging in the air like ghosts. The aftermath moved with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that felt almost anticlimactic after the thunder of Kane's arrest. Within 2 hours, Base Echo was locked down. Counterintelligence agents materialized from unmarked vehicles with badges and tablets. All personnel interviewed, statements recorded, the machinery of military justice grinding into motion with the inexorable patience of a glacier. By evening, the story had escaped the fence line. Text messages, phone calls, encrypted emails traveling through military networks like electricity through copper wire. Kane's arrest. Hartley's cover blown. Shadow Widow revealed to a world that hadn't known it existed. The news fragmented into 1,000 smaller explosions as people processed what it meant, what it said about trust, about the price of betrayal, about the women they'd dismissed and the monsters they'd followed. In the temporary counterintelligence headquarters, a converted classroom still smelling of dry erase markers, Commander Garrison Locke Reynolds debriefed Cassandra in a room with white walls and fluorescent lights that bleached everything of color. She sat across from him. Medical report in hand, the clinical language of damage assessment, bruised jaw healing, minor lacerations closed, muscle strain manageable, nothing permanent, everything calculated. Every injury documented and filed away as evidence in a case that would take months to prosecute but seconds to understand. The trial will take 4 to 6 months, Garrison said, reviewing notes on his tablet, blue light reflecting off his tired face. But with the helmet footage and the documented pattern, conviction is certain. JAG prosecutor called it the cleanest case he's seen in 15 years. He looked up. You did excellent work, Cassandra. Textbook execution. What about the others? Her voice was steady, flat, the voice of someone who'd learned not to celebrate until every thread was tied. The officers who participated. 6 facing disciplinary action. 2 will likely be discharged other than honorable. The rest get mandatory retraining and permanent marks that'll follow them to retirement. Garrison paused, studied her face. Is that enough? Cassandra looked at her hands, saw the rope burns from the climb. The dirt still embedded under her fingernails from the mud crawl, physical evidence of what she'd endured. It has to be, she said quietly. The system isn't perfect, but it's what we have. What about you? Garrison leaned back, made his chair creak. Medical leave, reassignment to training division, teaching instead of hunting. Whatever you need. Cassandra met his eyes. I want my next assignment. Garrison's eyebrow rose. You're serious after this, especially after this. She leaned forward. There are 11 other names on the list, 11 suspected cases of officers who abandoned teams, falsified reports, traded lives for careers. Her voice hardened like steel cooling. Kane was number 6. I have 11 more to go. Cassandra, Garrison's tone shifted, gentle. The voice of someone who'd seen too many good people burn themselves to ash chasing ghosts. You're walking a razor's edge between justice and self-destruction. I've seen people fall off that edge and never climb back up. The edge is mine to walk. He closed the tablet, set it aside, gave her his full attention. What happens when there's nothing left of Cassandra Hartley? When Shadow Widow has consumed everything that made you human? She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple, the kind of sunset that made you think about endings. Sir, with respect, I know what I signed up for. She met his gaze. Nate and 4 others died because someone decided medals mattered more than lives. I won't stop until every person who made that choice answers for it. She paused. That's not obsession, that's duty. Garrison studied her, saw the determination, the toll it had already taken. the toll it would continue to take. Finally, he nodded. I'll send you the briefing on number 7, but you're taking 2 weeks leave first. Non-negotiable. Doctor's orders. Mine too. Understood. And Cassandra. He waited until she met his eyes. The moment you feel yourself slipping, the moment this becomes about revenge instead of justice, you tell me. That line is thinner than you think. Yes, sir. She stood to leave. One more thing. Garrison's voice stopped her at the door. What you did here, it matters beyond Kane, beyond this base. You showed people that predators can be hunted, that silence can be a weapon, that patience wins, he paused. Don't lose sight of why that matters. Don't let the hunt become the only thing you are. Cassandra nodded once, then left. The evening air hit her like a wall when she stepped outside. Still hot, still Texas in August, but cleaner somehow, like a storm had passed and washed something rotten away. Wyatt Stone was waiting near the headquarters entrance, leaning against a concrete barrier with his arms crossed and the fading sunlight casting long shadows across his weathered face. He straightened when he saw her. Thought you might want company for the walk back. I appreciate that, Sergeant Major. They walked in silence for a minute. The base was quieter than usual, people moving with purpose but without the usual chatter, like everyone was still processing. Still trying to reconcile the widow they'd dismissed with the operative who'd brought down a colonel. I've been in this life 30 years, Wyatt said finally. His voice was thoughtful, measured, seen things that would break most people, met every kind of soldier you can imagine. He paused, looked at her. But what you did, that's different. That's a strength I can't quite measure. Cassandra glanced at him. Does it scare you? A little. He was honest about it. Because you're walking a line most people can't even see, between justice and something darker. And I worry what happens if you step wrong. My husband used to say the same thing, Cassandra said quietly. He'd tell me there were safer ways to fight, boys. What did you tell him? That safe doesn't catch monsters. Someone has to be willing to walk into the dark. Wyatt nodded slowly. He'd be proud and worried, same as me. They reached Cassandra's quarters. She paused at the door, turned to face him. Thank you, Sergeant Major, for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for being the one person who questioned what you were told. Just following my instincts. No, Cassandra's voice was firm. You did more than that. You reminded me there are still good people worth protecting, worth fighting for. She extended her hand. Wyatt shook it. His grip was firm, steady, the handshake of a man who meant what his touch conveyed. If you ever need someone with the right instincts, someone who can spot the lies, you let me know, he said. I'll keep my eyes open. And if I find another monster hiding behind metals, I know exactly who to call. Cassandra almost smiled. I'd appreciate that. And Hartley, he waited until she met his eyes. Don't lose yourself in the hunt. Your husband wouldn't want that. Neither do I. She nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. Then she went inside. The room was exactly as she'd left it. Bare walls, government-issue furniture, the sterile functionality of temporary quarters. But it felt different now, like the walls had witnessed something and couldn't forget. She sat on the edge of her bunk, let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Pulled out her secure phone. One message from Garrison. Debrief complete, orders attached. Report 72 hours. Well done. She opened the attachment, skimmed the details. Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Major Edmund Ashford Hayes. Suspected abandonment, Yemen hostage rescue. 6 soldiers captured, 2 killed during interrogation. She closed the file, would read it properly later, when her mind was clear and the adrenaline had fully drained. Right now, she needed something else. She pulled out her journal, the leather-bound book she'd kept since Nate's death. Opened to the page near the back where she'd written 12 names in careful script. Found number 6, Colonel Donovan Thatcher Kane. Drew a single line through it with a pen that felt heavier than it should. 11 names remained. She stared at the list for a long moment, each name representing a betrayal, a team abandoned, soldiers left to die while their commanders saved themselves and called it strategy. Then she picked up her pen, wrote beneath Kane's crossed-out name, "Justice isn't loud, it's patient, and it never forgets." She closed the journal, set it aside. 3 days later, Cassandra stood in the base chapel. Not for religious reasons, she'd stopped praying the day they handed her a folded flag and told her Nate was gone, but because it was the only place quiet enough to think, to remember without the weight of the mission crushing down. Early morning light filtered through simple windows, casting geometric patterns on the floor. dust motes floating in the air like tiny stars. She held Nate's dog tags in one hand, the steel pendant in the other. "It's done," she said quietly to the empty room, to the memory of the man who'd taught her how to climb, how to fight, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. Kane will face charges. The others who helped him will face consequences. Your name is cleared. Your sacrifice recognized. The tags swung gently on their chain, catching light. She closed her fingers around them, felt metal warming against her palm. "You'd hate this," she whispered. "Hate what I've become, but you also knew I couldn't walk away. You knew that the day you married me." She touched the dog tags to her forehead. "I'm sorry and I'm not sorry," both at the same time. A door opened behind her. Garrison entered. Respectful, quiet, gave her a moment before speaking. "Ready." Cassandra tucked the dog tags inside her shirt, close to her heart, clipped the pendant back around her neck. Almost, she turned to face him. "Walk with me." They stepped outside together. Morning sun warming the air. The base was coming to life. Formations running, training happening. The machinery of military order grinding forward like it always did. But something had shifted. In the mess hall, conversations were different, more thoughtful. Female soldiers sat straighter, spoke louder, like they'd seen proof that resilience could defeat power, and the lesson had taken root. In the gym, women trained harder, inspired by evidence that strength came in forms they hadn't been taught to recognize. In offices, commanders reviewed policies about harassment, about reporting, about accountability. One operation wouldn't fix everything, one arrest wouldn't cure the disease. But it was a crack in the armor, a message sent, a promise kept. "The briefing materials are in your inbox," Garrison said as they walked. "Major Hayes is smart, careful, been playing this game longer than Kane. You'll need to be patient. Patience is what I do best." "I know, that's why you're still alive." He paused. "But Hayes has friends, people in high places who owe him favors. This won't be as clean. You'll face resistance from angles you don't expect." Cassandra nodded. "I understand." "Do you, Garrison stopped, turned to face her. "Because the higher you go, the harder they fight. Kane was a colonel at a training base. Hayes has connections that reach Washington. The stakes are different. Then I'll be more careful, but I won't stop." Garrison studied her face, like he was looking for something. Maybe a crack, maybe doubt, maybe the human being underneath the operator. "2 weeks," he said finally. "You've got 2 weeks mandatory leave before you start. Use them. Rest. Remember who you are when you're not hunting." "Yes, sir." They reached the parking lot. A nondescript sedan waited, the kind of car that disappeared in traffic. "Your cover documents are in the glove box," Garrison said. "New name, new background, credentials that'll pass any check." He handed her a key fob. "Hayes doesn't know you exist yet. That's your advantage. Use it wisely." Cassandra took the keys. "Anything else?" "Yeah." Garrison's expression softened, just a slightly. "Thank you for doing what most people can't, for being willing to walk into the dark so others don't have to." He paused. "And take care of yourself. The mission matters." "But so do you." Cassandra nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. She climbed into the car, started the engine. The sound was ordinary, mundane, the noise of a million cars starting on a million mornings. But for her, it was the sound of a hunt beginning. As she pulled toward the gate, Wyatt appeared, standing near the exit. He raised one hand in salute. She returned it through the window. Then she was through the gate, out onto the highway. Texas stretching out around her, she drove in silence for an hour. Just her and the road and the hum of tires on asphalt. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. She glanced at it at a red light. "Coffee's on me when you get to Bragg. You'll need a friend there. Captain Miranda Shaw, another Shadow Widow operative, someone who understood the cost." Cassandra typed back, "I'll take you up on that." The light turned green. She drove on. Behind her, Base Echo faded in the rearview mirror. Another chapter closed. Another operation complete. Ahead, Fort Bragg waited in the distance. And somewhere in that distance, Major Edmund Ashford Hayes slept soundly, believing he'd gotten away with it, believing the files were sealed and the truth was buried. But Cassandra Veronica Hartley was coming. Founder of Shadow Widow. Widow turned weapon. The woman who'd learned that silence could be a trap and patience could be a blade. She touched the pendant at her throat, felt the weight of Nate's last moments, and permitted herself one small smile, not with joy, not with satisfaction, with the grim certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how it would end. The highway stretched on, mile markers passing, Texas giving way to Louisiana, the landscape changing, but the mission staying the same. Hunt, document, wait for the moment when the target revealed themselves, then strike. Not with violence, with evidence, with the weight of truth that no amount of metals could deflect. She drove through the afternoon, stopping only for gas and coffee that tasted like regret, pushing forward because forward was the only direction that mattered. By evening, she'd crossed into Mississippi, the sun setting behind her, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. She pulled into a rest stop, empty except for a few trucks in the far corner, grabbed her journal from her bag, opened to the page with 12 names, looked at Kane's crossed-out name, then at the 11 that remained. Number 7, Major Edmund Ashford Hayes. Number 8, Colonel Victoria Brennan. Number 9, Lieutenant Colonel James Whitmore. The list continued, each name a betrayal, a team abandoned, soldiers left to die while their commanders chose careers over conscience. She traced her finger down the list, feeling the weight. Then she wrote in careful script, 11 more to go. 11 more chances to prove that no one is untouchable, that patience and silence can bring down anyone, no matter how protected they think they are. She closed the journal, put it away, sat for a moment, breathing, centering herself. Then she pulled back onto the highway, heading east toward North Carolina, toward Fort Bragg, toward Major Edmund Ashford Hayes, who didn't know yet that his past was coming for him. The miles rolled past, Mississippi fading into Alabama, Alabama into Georgia, the landscape changing, but the purpose staying constant. She drove through the night, pushing through fatigue, because rest could wait, the mission couldn't. By dawn, she was crossing into South Carolina, the sun rising ahead of her, painting the sky in shades of hope and warning both. She thought about Kane, sitting in a federal holding cell, waiting for trial, waiting to face every name he'd left behind. She thought about the women who'd saluted, who'd seen what was possible when you refused to break. She thought about Wyatt, about Garrison, about the people who'd chosen to help even when it would have been easier to look away. And she thought about Nate, about the promise she'd made standing over his grave, that she would find everyone responsible, everyone who chose ambition over honor, everyone who thought rank made them untouchable. And she would make them answer, not with rage, not with revenge, with justice. Cold, patient, inevitable. The kind that didn't care about connections or medals or how many friends you had in Washington. The kind that only cared about truth. By midday, she crossed into North Carolina. Fort Bragg was 3 hours away. She stopped at a diner, ordered coffee and eggs she barely tasted, reviewed the briefing materials on her tablet. Major Edmund Ashford Hayes, 42 years old, 15-year career. Decorated for valor in 3 combat zones. Suspected of abandoning a hostage rescue team in Yemen to preserve political relationships with a foreign government. The photo showed a man with distinguished gray at the temples. Confident smile, awards and commendations. The face of someone who'd learned to wear success like armor. He looked nothing like Kane. But she knew that didn't matter. Monsters wore all kinds of faces. She memorized details, built the profile, learned the patterns of a man she'd never met but would come to know better than he knew himself. Then she closed the files, paid her bill, got back in the car. 3 hours to Fort Bragg. 3 hours until the next hunt began. She drove through the afternoon, through small towns and pine forests, through a landscape that looked peaceful but held its own secrets. As the sun began its descent, she saw the sign. Fort Bragg, 10 miles. Her phone buzzed. Text from Miranda. Room's ready. Coffee's hot. Welcome to Bragg. Cassandra typed back, on my way. She drove the final miles, through the gate, past the guards who checked her credentials and waved her through, into another base, another mission, another monster who needed to be stopped. She found the visiting officer quarters, parked, grabbed her bag. Miranda was waiting outside. Tall, black hair pulled back, eyes that had seen the same darkness Cassandra had. They didn't hug, just nodded, understanding passing between them without words. Coffee, Miranda asked. Coffee. They walked inside together. 2 operators, 2 hunters, 2 women who'd learned that justice required patience and silence and the willingness to walk into the dark. Behind them, the sun set on Fort Bragg. Somewhere on base, Major Edmund Ashford Hayes was finishing his day, filing paperwork, planning tomorrow, sleeping soundly, not knowing that in the morning a new counselor would arrive. A widow with impressive credentials and a sad story, Someone who seemed fragile, broken, easy to dismiss, until the moment she revealed what she really was. And by then it would be too late. The trap would be set, the evidence would be gathered, and patience, cold, relentless, unforgiving patience, would claim another monster. Cassandra sat in the small apartment, sipped coffee Miranda had made, looked out the window at a base that didn't know her yet. "How long do you think?" Miranda asked. 3 months, maybe 4. Hayes is careful. They always are until they're not. Cassandra nodded, set down her cup, looked at her hands. The rope burns had healed, the bruises had faded, the visible damage was gone, but the scars underneath those would stay. Add to the collection. Mark her as someone who'd walked into the dark and come back changed. "You okay?" Miranda asked quietly. Cassandra considered the question, really considered it. "I don't know," she said finally. "Honest, ask me when all 12 names are crossed off. And if you're not okay, then I'll deal with it then." Miranda studied her, saw the determination, the toll it was already taking. "You're not alone in this," she said. "Shadow Widow, we're a team. You don't have to carry it all yourself." "I know." Cassandra met her eyes. "And I'm grateful." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 operators preparing for the next hunt, finding strength in the shared understanding of what it cost and why it mattered. Outside, Fort Bragg settled into evening rhythms, and in the distance the hunt waited. But for tonight, Cassandra allowed herself to rest, to remember that she was human underneath the operator, that the mission mattered, but so did she. Tomorrow she would become someone new, a counselor with a cover story, a widow seeking purpose. But tonight she was just Cassandra, and that was enough. She finished her coffee, stood. "I should get some sleep." 2 weeks leave, Miranda reminded her. "Garrison's orders." "I know, I'll use them." "Will you?" Cassandra paused at the door, looked back. "I'll try." It was the most honest answer she could give. She went to her temporary quarters, unpacked her bag, set Nate's dog tags on the nightstand where she could see them, lay down on unfamiliar sheets in an unfamiliar room, closed her eyes. And for the first time in 3 months, she slept without counting breaths or planning contingencies or preparing for violence. She just slept and dreamed of a world where monsters didn't exist and justice didn't require darkness and widows could just be wives. When she woke, the sun was rising. Fort Bragg was waking up around her, and somewhere on this base, Major Edmund Ashford Hayes was starting his day. Not knowing his past was coming for him, not knowing that patience had a name. And that name was Shadow Widow. Cassandra stood, dressed, made coffee in the small kitchenette, looked out the window at a base full of people who didn't know her yet. In 2 weeks she would begin, but for now she had time to prepare, to rest, to remember why this mattered. She pulled out her journal, opened to the page with 11 remaining names, looked at number 7, Major Edmund Ashford Hayes, and began to plan. Because justice wasn't loud, it was patient. And it never ever forgot.